So our class today is on tiny habits for relationships. Ultimately, what I'm going to teach you is how to create and change behavior that can support your relationships, both at work and at home. So let's give you a little bit more information about who I am. My name is Katie Whittakin. I'm the Wellness Program Manager. I have a master's in positive psychology. I have 14 years of experience in behavior change, and I have 7 years of experience in corporate health and wellness. And I've been running your health and wellness program for the NAPEP employers for the last 7 years. But let's talk about behavior. There are 3 main components to behavior. One of them is motivation. Another of them is the ability to do the behavior. And then a third one is a prompt to do the behavior. So motivation for the behavior, ability to do the behavior, and a prompt to do the behavior. So let's look at how these 3 pieces interact. Before you'll see a graph, and it's the Fogg behavior model. BJ Fogg comes from Stanford University, and he created this in order for the overall population to better understand behavior. So for behavior, we want to recognize that there on the x-axis there is ability. Something is either hard to do at the far left or something is easy to do on the far right. And then you'll see on the y-axis motivation. Motivation being low on the bottom and high at the top. Anything that happens where there's a prompt to do a behavior over the action line is something that where a behavior is successful. And then anything below the action line is where behavior is not successful. And so let me give you an example. Let's think of a behavior that is maybe really hard to do. For example, flying, meaning flying like a bird. Maybe I have high motivation to fly like a bird. But you'll notice that if the behavior is really hard to do, it doesn't matter how much motivation I have, it may just not happen. And on the other end of the scale, maybe something is super easy to do, but if I have 0 motivation to do it, again, it is unlikely to happen, as you can see in this graph. But if we have something that's fairly easy to do, even if we have low motivation to do it, it can fall over that green action line and allow us to actually be successful in that behavior. And I bring this up to you mostly because what we go over today, we're going to apply to relationships, both in the home and at work, but you can apply it to any behavior that you want to alter. This model or this understanding of behavior works for any behavior. In other words, it's important to recognize that there are 3 levers to changing behavior: motivation, ability, and prompts. And if you get nothing else from today's webinar, I hope that you get this next slide, which is stop depending on motivation or willpower alone. I say motivation, willpower, because a lot of people talk about not having the willpower, and really what they're talking about is not having the motivation to do a behavior. Remember, this is only one lever to behavior change, and it's not the only one you can pull. In fact, the other 2, ability and prompts, are easier levers to pull on than motivation. So my hope for you is that you think about motivation, you think about behavior and the ways to make behavior succeed in order of more ability, prompts, then at the end, think about how you might pull the lever of motivation. So remember, if we can make something really easy to do on this behavior change model, then we don't need a lot of motivation. We just need a prompt, and then the behavior is more likely to occur. So let's talk about what it means to make a behavior easy. This is the pulling on the ability lever. Basically, we want to make it so easy that it's almost difficult to not succeed in it. In other words, if we can make a behavior 30 seconds or less, then we've made it a tiny habit, or essentially that's the makeup of creating a tiny habit, 30 seconds or less. And a lot of times I get questions like, well, that's not really what I want. You know, what I want, my big aspiration is to lose weight, or my big aspiration is to improve my marriage or to improve communication with my boss. How is a 30-second behavior going to get there? And I will say this, doing a big behavior that you only do once or twice is certainly not going to get you there. Doing a small behavior that you repeat and are successful in sustaining over time will get you there, because it'll plant the seed. And the thing to know is that the more successful we are with easier behaviors that require low motivation, the more quickly our motivation goes up and we're able to do harder and harder behaviors with higher and higher motivation. So it is important to be successful early with small, tiny behaviors. So that's why we're going to make them easy. So let me give you an example, and this isn't related to relationships, but you see a picture here of a woman just putting on her running shoes and getting out of bed. This is actually something I did when I was trying to increase my physical activity. I struggled with figuring out how to fit in physical activity, being a mother of two and working full time and having a lot going on. So one of the things that I did is I chose to sleep in my running clothes. That made it easy in the morning because I didn't have to decide what to put on. And then I made a tiny habit of putting my running shoes right next to my bed. It took me 30 seconds to put my running shoes right next to my bed. When I woke up, being in my running clothes was prompt enough for me to go running. And then with my shoes being right next to my bed, it was really fast and easy to put them on and then start to go on a walk. Now, I would consider the behavior of just putting on my running shoes as the behavior that was my goal. Going on an actual run or a walk afterward was just icing on the cake. If I just put on my shoes and then ran out of time, it was still a success that day. And I placed it in a part of my day where I was able to fit in running if I were able to add to that tiny behavior. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but this is just a quick example of how you can do a 30-second behavior that can open the door to larger behaviors down the road. So let's talk about how this relates to relationships. Relationships are, on the slide is a list of things that really support relationships. So these are things like showing acknowledgement, showing gratitude, showing appreciation, showing interest, and showing affection. Now, these obviously mean different things in different relationships, but let's talk a little bit about what a 30-second easy behavior might be on each of these. For example, let's say showing acknowledgement at work. Let's say you have a rough relationship with a coworker or maybe your boss, and showing acknowledgement could be a simple taking 30 seconds to write on a sticky note, thank you for warming up the water for coffee today, thank you for, I just wanted to acknowledge that you really did a good job on, setting up that PowerPoint for me yesterday. So showing acknowledgement could be a quick sticky note, just saying it real quick. These are like really quick things. Gratitude could just be like, hey, I'm really grateful to have you here, right? It takes 10 seconds to say something like that. It might be a note, it might be an email. It could be happening at home when you wake up in the morning and telling a partner, hey, I'm really grateful that you're in my life. So expressing gratitude. And then appreciation. This might be a little bit different, and I always get a little pushback on this one. So I'm going to talk about this one for just a second. So an example at home might be, let's say a loved one, even if it's a child or a partner, they do the dishes. And then just taking a second and appreciating them and say, hey, thank you for doing the dishes. Now, the pushback I often get for this is, well, why should I thank someone for doing something that just needs to get done? And my response always to this is not thanking them getting it done, right? So when we show appreciation in our relationships, or we show gratitude, or we show acknowledgement, then we're likely to see those behaviors increase from our loved one, because they also appreciate the good feeling that comes from receiving acknowledgement, receiving gratitude, and receiving appreciation. So even if you feel like, well, I do the dishes all the time and they don't show me appreciation, well, guess what? If you take 30 seconds to show appreciation over doing the dishes, you might start to see that behavior come out of your loved one very soon. And same goes for at work, showing appreciation for small things and taking 30 seconds to write the sticky note or say it out loud can have a big impact on relationships. So another big relationship helper here is showing interest. So when someone shares a piece of good news, sometimes we can have the reaction of, oh, that's good, and then moving on and not really taking time to show interest. Oh, that's great news. Tell me about it. You got a new car? What kind is it? And showing interest with a 30-second question can go a long way with developing a better relationship. Same goes at work or at home. So you can think about it as in terms of when someone shares good news, showing interest in it goes a long way. And then the last one is affection. And so an example of this might be taking the time to actually maybe kiss a loved one goodbye for the day, whether that be your child or your partner. It might be holding hands. It might be sitting next to them on the couch or cuddling. And, at work, it might be a pat on the back. It might be something that is more appropriate for that circumstance. But anyway, affection in and of itself is a relationship helper. So there are many other things, and you could brainstorm other relationship helpers. Maybe you're thinking of one right now when you're thinking of a relationship that you would like to improve. But even if you stick to the ones here in these bullet points, these are going to be able to have big impacts, even if you only do one 30-second one a day. So my task for you right now for just a few seconds is to brainstorm what tiny habits you could do that are related to these bullet points for the relationship that you might have in mind that you'd like to improve, whether it be at home or at work. A 30-second acknowledgement, gratitude, showing appreciation or thank you, interest, or affection. So go ahead and just take a moment to think of something, and then please write it down. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to think of one 30-second tiny habit or behavior that you could do that is related to one of these relationship helpers. But as we talked about earlier, there is more than just pulling the lever of ability and coming up with a behavior that's really easy. There's also prompts or a reminder to do the behavior that's really important. And this is the part that I feel like people often just don't know about behavior, and therefore they don't design their behavior change in a way to be successful. So you might have the best little 30-second behavior in mind to improve a relationship, but if there's nothing in your life to remind you to do it, you're likely to forget, especially because it's a new behavior. So a prompt is anything that reminds you to do the behavior. Remember earlier I gave an example of having my running shoes right next to my bed, or even being in my running clothes when I woke up. These are two different prompts. You could use more than one sometimes, but I'd like to present the idea of prompts in a way that is going to lead you to the most success, which is this. It's important that you anchor your prompt. What does that mean? Well, if you think of a prompt that may or may not happen, then it may or may not remind you to do the behavior. For example, when my employee says hello to me, I'm going to tell them I appreciate having them work with me. Okay, but what if they never say hello to you? Then that prompt may never occur. So anchoring it means finding something that happens without fail every day that you want to do or complete this behavior. So I'm going to give you an example. So my tiny habit behavior might be to show affection to my husband by giving him a kiss at some point in the day. So where am I going to anchor it? Well, I know that my morning routine is more consistent than the whole rest of my day. And in the morning, without fail, I get up and I sit by the fireplace and drink a cup of green tea. So I could anchor my prompt could be when I sit down by the fireplace. When I sit down by the fireplace, I'll give my husband a kiss, because without fail, he always sits there next to me in the morning, Monday through Friday. And so I'm going to anchor it to something that I know happens each and every day. And then when I sit down by the fireplace, it's going to remind me, oh yeah, there's my prompt. I have a tiny behavior to do now. And this is planting a tiny seed of a behavior, but maybe you have a larger behavior that you want to get to. So my example of kissing my husband, that is just showing affection to support a relationship. The intention isn't really to grow it in that moment. But the earlier example I gave you, for instance, which was putting on my running shoes, that might be intended to grow into actually exercising in the morning, right? So how do we get a behavior to grow? Well, we have to anchor our prompt in a time where there is actually time for that behavior to grow. So for an example, let's say my behavior was to put on my running shoes in the morning. That is the behavior. I get to just be satisfied with completing that behavior. But I want to put it in a time where I know there is time to actually complete my big aspiration behavior that I'm going for, which is maybe to go on a 20-minute walk in the morning. So if I plant the seed, and for a week, every day, I put my running shoes on. I don't go on a run. I don't go on a walk, but I do succeed in putting my running shoes on. Now I feel successful. I've successfully completed a new habit, which is I'm up in the morning at the same time every day with my running shoes on. Now I can start creating another tiny habit, which is I open the door and walk out front, right? And at that point, I might feel, and I can choose to grow the habit in that moment. I can say, hey, you know what? I'm outside. It's beautiful. I got my shoes on. I'm going to walk around the block. All of a sudden, I'm able to do harder and harder behaviors because my motivation is up, because I've been successful in some of my smaller tiny habits. Okay? And that's how you watch a tiny habit grow. So I put this next slide in here because we're looking at a picture of an elephant here. And oftentimes where people go wrong with trying to do a new behavior is they start with the elephant. They say, I want to work out every morning for 20 minutes before I go to work. Okay, great. Except you've started with an elephant instead of taking one small bite at a time of that elephant. When you take a small bite and you're successful at that bite, it's much easier to grow into that elephant than starting with the elephant. So if you learn nothing else, I'm hoping you remember that small steps equals more success. Small steps equals more success. And again, that example was, I started with just putting my shoes on in the morning. Then I started with just walking outside. Now all of a sudden I'm just going for a 10-minute walk, and then it becomes a 15-minute walk, and then a 40-minute walk. Now, 2 months from now, all of a sudden I'm running or jogging for 20 minutes every morning. That becomes the elephant, right? So that's how a small behavior grows. So knowing this, thinking about your tiny behavior you wrote down earlier to improve a relationship, I would love for you to think and brainstorm for a moment about a prompt, something that can prompt you to do this behavior. And remember to anchor your prompt. Anchor it to something that is pretty consistent. Now, one question I get on this is, well, but my weekend schedule is different, or when I travel, things are different. That's true. But think about when you want to do this behavior most, and start there with whatever routine you have that you consistently do. Another example is, most of us brush our teeth, even if we're traveling. Most of us brush our teeth in the morning, right? So that's a pretty solid anchoring habit. So be thinking about, can I find a prompt that fits and anchors into something I consistently do? So go ahead and take a few seconds to just think about that. Okay, we're going to keep going, but if you've struggled with thinking of a prompt for the behavior and anchoring it to something that happens every day, then I do recommend you just take a few minutes and sit down and actually write out your schedule. What is it that you do step by step? Now, the trick here is people often tend to jump over things. I wake up, I get dressed, I eat breakfast, I leave for work. Well, there's a whole lot going on between those steps. You open your eyes, you put your feet on the floor, maybe you put on slippers, maybe you use the restroom, maybe you put on a robe. Putting on a robe could be an anchoring moment that allows you to add a prompt. That is the prompt, putting on my robe, and then I am going to think of 3 things I'm grateful for. Whatever it is, there's lots of little things you do consistently. So try your best to think of what those are and keep brainstorming on where you can add your tiny relationships habit. Okay, and if you have further questions, I will give you my email at the end here to help guide you through that process. So far we've talked about 2 of the 3 levers for behavior change. One was ability. How do we make it easy to do so we don't have to rely on motivation? One was prompts. How can we add prompts to do the behavior in our day? And the third is motivation. So it's not that I don't want you to use motivation ever. I just don't want you to rely solely on motivation, especially as the first thing you lean on, because the other 2 are actually easier to work with. So when it comes to motivation, it's important to understand one thing we've learned through research, which is that positive emotions reinforce behavior. So what does that mean? Well, essentially, when you do a behavior and then you experience a positive emotion, you wire your brain to want to repeat that behavior. This is exactly why video games work so brilliantly. You level up, you win, balloons go over the screen, and you're excited and you want to do it again. It helps wire in your brain a desire to want to repeat the behavior. The positive feeling doesn't even have to be directly related to the behavior itself. So, for example, maybe my tiny behavior is every time I use the restroom first thing in the morning, I am going to do 2 squats. Okay. Well, afterward, that experience in and of itself may not fill me with positive emotion, but afterward, I might do a little celebration. And that celebration might take just a second or 2, but it gives me a positive emotion that helps wire my brain to want to repeat the behavior. So how do we celebrate? Well, let's talk about how we celebrate. That last picture you saw was of a baby with their arms up, kind of like a yay. And this is a really common physical movement. So physical movement can be a celebration. It can be a fist bump in the air. It can be like when you drag your elbow down to your waist and you go, yes. So it can be verbal, yes, I'm awesome. You did great. It could also be something you think about that makes you laugh or makes you smile. Even just physically smiling can be enough. But know this, the stronger the positive emotion, the quicker you're mapping your brain to want to repeat that behavior. And again, let me say that again. The stronger the positive emotion, the sooner you're going to make that behavior a habit. So for me, I'll just share my personal, one of my personal celebrations, which is I think about my son laughing and then I smile. And when I smile and I think about my son laughing, it fills me with a sense of positive emotion. So I might do my 2 squats after using the restroom first thing in the morning. And then I think about my son laughing and I smile, and it really helps remap my desire to want to do that behavior again. So I'd like to just take a few seconds here and for you to brainstorm a small way for you to celebrate. And again, remember, I haven't said reward. I'm not saying you're giving yourself a reward of a piece of chocolate for completing the behavior. I'm saying celebrate. We're thinking positive emotion. Is it a picture? Is it a thought? Is it a smile? Is it a fist bump? Is it something you do that feels silly that makes you ultimately laugh? Laughing in and of itself. These are all ways to feel positive emotion and ways to celebrate. So take a few moments here and brainstorm for yourself a small way that you could celebrate your behavior. Okay, so we are gonna keep going, but hopefully you were able to come up with some small way. And don't be afraid if you came up with something and maybe it doesn't give you as much positive emotion as you thought it might. That's okay. Think of something, whether that be a touchdown move that you see on TV when someone scores a touchdown in football, whatever it is, let it be silly, let it be fun, let it fill you with positive emotion. And if it's not the right one, know that you can always change what the celebration is. So far, you should have written down one small 30-second tiny behavior. You should also have written down a prompt and where that prompt goes, where you're anchoring that prompt in your day, and one celebration or way to celebrate your small, tiny habit. Okay. So the next step here is to clearly state what it is you're going to do. So it looks something like this. When I, and then that's where you enter in your anchored prompt. I will, and that's where you enter in your tiny behavior that's going to become your habit. Then I celebrate, and then you write down how it is you're going to celebrate. So for an example, when I sit down by the fire in the morning, this is my anchored prompt because it happens all the time and it's going to prompt me to, I will kiss my husband good morning. Great. Then I celebrate by smiling, and that smile alone gives me a sense of positive emotion and joy that will reinforce the desire to keep doing that behavior. Okay, so take a minute and fill in the blanks here with when I, and put in your anchored prompt, I will, and put in your 30-second tiny behavior, then I celebrate, and then write down the way in which you plan to celebrate. So go ahead and just take a minute to do that. Okay, we're going to move on. If you didn't get a chance to finish this, then feel free to just write out when I will, then I celebrate, and you can fill in the blanks later. So today we talked about really the science of behavior change, and that there's 3 things that really do guarantee success when it comes to behavior change. One lever is ability, meaning if you can make it easy, you're more likely to succeed. So that's where this idea of a tiny habit comes in. Creating a tiny habit is something that is 30 seconds or less, a really tiny habit. You're making it so easy, it's almost difficult not to do. So you're really moving it along the line of easy to do. Then you're going to use a prompt. And you're going to anchor your prompt to a solid daily event, something that always happens in your routine that then is going to remind you to do this tiny, easy behavior. Then you're going to add a celebration, and that celebration is going to positively reinforce your motivation to do that behavior again. And this is how a habit is created. Now, again, we were aligning it to relationships today, but you can think about this and align it to any behavior that you want to change, as long as you're making it tiny enough to start and anchoring it in something that is going to consistently prompt you and celebrate. Now, often I get pushback on, I don't need to celebrate something so tiny. It's just a small thing and I can get it done. Let me tell you this. I have changed many behaviors in my life. And when I have chosen a behavior and then not celebrated it, it has taken significantly longer for that behavior to become a habit. When you celebrate it, it really does remap the brain and really does impact your motivation to want to do the behavior again. So if you want this behavior to become a habit quickly and then to grow quickly to meet your big aspiration, your elephant aspiration quickly, then celebrate. That's the fastest, easiest way to do that. Okay, so this was all great information about behavior change, but before I leave you, I want to address something that is often a challenge for many people, and that is the idea of failure. When it comes to behavior change, many of us have a lot of experiences with failing to succeed at our behavior change. Have you ever heard someone say, I just can't lose weight, or I just can't diet? It's not that you can't, it's that the way in which you tried to do it didn't work. And it's likely because you tried the elephant approach. You tried to do it all at once and then weren't able to anchor it and create prompts for yourself. And then quickly your motivation went down. So I want to create a different way of thinking about this. We call this a growth mindset. Essentially, it's this idea that there is no such thing as failure when it comes to behavior change, but only refinement. So you'll be surprised, even with a 30-second behavior, maybe your kid wakes up sick and then your morning routine is off and you completely forget the behavior that day. That may happen. Maybe you're sick yourself and you get off track with your behavior and you're sick for a week. Maybe something happens with your routine and your prompts aren't in place, or maybe you need to move where you put your prompt to a different anchoring moment so that you're more successful. So no such thing as failure, just data points. And these data points can help you understand where you might need to make adjustments so you can refine your plan. And then you can go back and say, okay, this wasn't working. Maybe I need to find a new place to anchor my prompt. Maybe my behavior isn't tiny enough. Maybe I've skipped some steps and I'm thinking, you did something like, after I use the restroom first thing in the morning, I will do the dishes. Well, there's a few things with that. One, the dishes are in the kitchen and you're in the bathroom. There's a lot of steps in between, so the prompt probably isn't immediate enough. Two, doing the dishes isn't tiny enough. That is going to take potentially 5, 10, 15 minutes. So something that might be better is when I turn the light on in the kitchen in the morning, I will put away 1 cup, right? And that's a great way to get started. Then you'd be amazed people will start putting away a cup every time they put on the light in that room. And then before you know it, the dishes are put away before they even leave for work. So this is an opportunity to think of refinement rather than thinking, I can't, this is failure. Even if you have a past history of failing, remember, it's probably because you didn't know all of these levers to work with, and you probably started with the elephant instead of taking a small bite of the elephant. Okay, so with that note, I did want to share with you a few of the research articles that that feed into this whole concept on motivation and positive reinforcement of emotions and increasing self-efficacy. And if you are interested in more information, I wanted to bring your awareness to the fact that there is a book written by BJ Fogg from Stanford, and he talks about tiny habits, and he goes over the whole model in this book. It is also on Audible. So if you're interested in this as an approach and want to learn more, feel free to get a copy of that book. And then I also listed here a resource, which is that we have free health coaching available at our Vera clinic for anyone on our health plan. So if you're on our health plan and you want to get some free health coaching, you can call that number there below, and they can also walk you through this. You can share with them what you learned about how to change behavior, and they can maybe help you identify some prompts. They can help you make it tiny enough, and don't be afraid to change it up, refine it. So thank you so much for your time today. I wanted to provide you with both my office phone number here and with my email. So you can contact me with questions if you have any after trying to apply this to your life. I wish you well, and I hope that your tiny habits grow into big elephant behaviors that improve your relationships both at home and at work. Have a wonderful rest of your day.